Coach Ron Bargatze joins the podcast. He's known as Mr. Basketball in the Mid-State. I think you can call him that. He feels like he's coached at every local school. He's coached in East Tennessee. He's coached in the Mid-State. Who knows where else he's coached, but he was inducted into the TSSAA Hall of Fame back in 2018. He coached at Belmont, Tennessee Tech, Vandy, of course, Trevecca, and Austin Peay. He's also a radio color analyst for Vanderbilt Basketball for 15 years, from 1985 to 2001. We'll get into that a little bit later. And assistant coach at Vanderbilt under Roy Skinner as well. So, Coach, it's been a long. I think we had you on last season, but it's nice to have you back on talking a little Vandy hoops with a lot of basketball left this season.
Oh, glad to be here, Billy and Trevor. Heck, this is the time of year right now. We can see the tournaments a little bit out in the distance, and everybody's fighting to get in there and try to make their mark. So it's a fun time.
No doubt. And Coach, I feel like we always try to have you on in this time of year to not just talk Vandy, talk a little SEC as well. But I was reading, before we get into Vandy and kind of this season, I was reading that you grew up a Vandy fan in the early 1950s. You saw the prime of basketball in Nashville, in this city, and more importantly, the absolute snake pit that was Memorial Gym for every opponent. Not that it isn't now, but it's not to the effect that it was. And Trevor and I, of course, we've heard so many stories about it. What made it so tough for opponents, not just when you coached, but even after you coached, after you left, being in the city and going to games there? And do you believe it still has that same effect, or can have the same effect?
Absolutely it can. It's interesting. Let me tell you, the first college game I ever went to, I was a young guy, 1954. I was 11 years old, and my uncle, who lived up in Kentucky, called me one night and said, I had 2 tickets to the game tonight, and my fella got sick, and I wonder if you want to go to the game. That game was the 1-game playoff in the 1954 college basketball season, when LSU and Kentucky tied for the championship, and they played a 1-game playoff in Memorial Gym. And the first college game I ever saw, and I was totally mesmerized by Memorial Gym. Those baskets hung from the ceiling, and you could run under them forever and ever. They just hung out there ready to shoot on. Great engineering, the way that building was made. But then when they put the balconies in, they had to change the type goals they had, and so it wasn't as user friendly for the people behind the basket. But it was certainly nice for the game that's evolved over the years.
And it's crazy looking back at, what that gym was, what it is today, but it'll never lose that, that effect. I don't think it'll never lose with the students right there on you. I don't know if you've been to any games this year, but the students have been awesome, and they've shown up and they've made impacts on games. But Coach, I want to ask you this. We've talked about this in podcasts before about, it seems like every team shoots better in that gym. I don't know what it is. I don't know why, but do you have an answer to that? I mean, what is it? Is there something about the air in there, about the goals? I mean, and even dating back, I've heard stories about teams that may not be great shooting teams that go in that gym and they shoot well.
Well, let me give you the real history of that and the real effect. I've worked a lot of camps over the years, even since I've been out of coaching and when I was in coaching, and talked to a lot of players who came in as visiting teams. They loved coming here for a couple reasons. One is so much room around the court. That's what they all talk about. And the lighting is good. It is now. It wasn't quite as good back in the day, but now the lighting is really good, and you can see those baskets out there. And it's just it's like no interference shooting. It's like you can be out there in July playing. Of course, that's another whole story, because we tried to get air conditioning done in that building over several years, and never have taken no takers on that, and obviously still not air conditioned. And it may be the hottest gymnasium in the summer I've ever been in. You probably been to camps there or something and know how that works.
Oh, I was at the Memphis game. Trevor, I don't know if you were at the Memphis game.
I was there. I'd never sweat so much in my life at that game.
It
was bad.
It's unbelievable. But it's a perfect shooting background. You don't really see the people through the backboard. They're far enough away, and the court lighting allows you to be out there, and it's like everybody shoots good in that gym. And,
Yeah.
and every individual player will tell you it's their favorite shooting gym.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I talked about it the other day, especially in the city now, that the city has that effect of people want to be in Nashville, not only in Nashville, but in that type of a gym and that cool area. So, Coach, I mean, you've seen that gym, and I know Trevor would like to ask you about that, how Memorial's changed and the atmosphere over the years. But I want to get to, you worked with 4 different play-by-play guys in your 15 years as a radio color analyst for basketball games. I'm sure you've been asked this question. Do you have a favorite that you were able to work with, or any stories from back in the day, from 85 to the early 2000s when you were doing color games?
Well, of course, George Plaster's 4th on my. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I've always loved working with George because George understands the game, and it's kind of like two guys in a bar drinking their Dr. Pepper and talking about a game. That's how I felt working with George. But the first guy I worked with was Charlie Alexander, and Charlie Mack was first, and then George came along for a while, then Wes Durham, and then Joe Fisher. So I didn't dislike any of them. They were all great guys to work with. And but I would say that as a color analyst, if you're doing a color analysis in a radio game, it's a totally different world than doing it on TV.
Yeah.
On TV, the color guy is kind of the star of the show, and he kind of lets you can talk over the action. But when you work in the radio side of things, then you've got to get in and get out quickly. So your comments have got to be brief and on point. And so being a color guy, they ought to pay you double than they do radio because of how much more you have to work.
We got Coach Ron Bargatze, former Vanderbilt assistant under Roy Skinner, on the show with us. Trevor, what you got for him?
Coach, a couple questions. First off, the Vanderbilt recently just played Kentucky. There was from fans a lot of hope, I feel, going into this game, thinking that Vanderbilt could maybe keep it close. I know specifically at the big position, Oscar Tshiebwe is a menace against no matter who he plays. Especially against a Vanderbilt team that was undermanned, is putting it lightly, at the 5 spot. First off, how much of the Kentucky game did you watch?
Every second of it.
Perfect. And then secondly, I was listening to a little bit of you with Billy and George Plaster today, and you made a comment about how it sort of surprised you how much Jerry Stackhouse substituted. If you could sort of talk about that, maybe give a little insight on the sort of rotations that you saw Jerry Stackhouse use with the 5 players on the court, because with fans, we obviously don't know as much basketball as you do, but to the fans, it looks like sometimes he's just throwing out 5 guys have no sort of cohesion, and it doesn't make any sense to us. But you as a coach and all the basketball you've seen, can you see like the 5 that he's throwing out at any time and be like, okay, well, this might be the reason he's throwing them out there, or so-and-so?
Well, when I go to any game, whether it's high school, college, and I don't go to pro games, I watch a lot of them actually now because I love 3-point shooting, but most coaches are second guessed most of the time about who they have in the game and why so-and-so didn't get any more minutes than they did. I think anytime, and I've watched an awful lot of Belmont games during the Rick Byrd era and now Casey Alexander. I go to all their games, and I can tell you right now, if you play a lot of players, you're going to end up with bad combinations sometime. Combinations that are either weaker on defense or weaker offensively because you lose and gain sometimes by the combination of players you have in the game. And I thought with the big man being out with his injury, Robbins, I thought that really changes how you what team you put on the floor and what they do best and which one's the most effective. Who would have ever imagined Dia coming in and making threes like he did? That was a shocker, a great surprise. And theoretically, if you have a Tshiebwe in the game and he's matched up against Dia and he makes 4 or 5 3-pointers, darn, that looks like a winning combination.
Yeah.
Get it any way you can get Tshiebwe away from the basket. Now, Rick Byrd and Casey Alexander do this, but Rick Byrd particularly would start his offenses always with a high ball screen with his 1-man and 5-man, or 2 guys who an inside and outside player, to see how they're going to switch or hedge and recover, and how they play that defensively. And if you get some people will still switch even 1 and 5 on a ball screen. So the whole theory of getting your offense started sometime is how you get it started without being forced out on the court further than you want to be, if they can take you out of your offense a little bit by doing that. So theoretically, the Shibwe getting him away from the basket would be optimum, because what a great rebounder he is and defender when they come into the paint against him. So I think Coach Stackhouse had a pretty big chore on his hands, having to figure out how to neutralize what Shibwe can do. Shibwe's a guy that can go 28 and 15 on you. Mm-hmm. And the other night, the numbers were much lower, but they were pretty effective. And then you've got a guy who can come in and make threes off the bench, and that changes your whole attitude about things. Frederick, can really light it up. Got a great reputation, and rightly so, as a 3-point shooter. And of course, you got Toppin in there. He's a hard guy to match up with. So it was really a checker game on how to offset Shibwe's dominating ability and get points yourself. But I thought he ended up there with some tough lineups, either defensively or to have the flow you want in offense.
No, yeah, that's great. And so, speaking of Liam, obviously going into the season, Vanderbilt had high expectations for him, fans alike. And up until his injury, I feel like he fulfilled every single one of those hopes and dreams that Vanderbilt fans had for him. He was playing at a great level. With him being out, and not just Liam, but then your next big up in Lee Dort, where does Vandy go from here in game plan wise? Is it playing Malik Dia more and just hoping that you can bring that big out to the perimeter, or is it going small and putting Miles Studi at 5 more often than you want to, that we saw?
I don't know. It's a chess match in a lot of ways, and you do the same thing against Kentucky as you do against LSU or Ole Miss, and we all like to think that coaches have an answer for everything, but they're experimenting. They have to experiment some, because they've got to figure things out on a game-by-game basis. So, A&M's coming up here soon, and that's going to be a whole different world, because they're going to guard you when you get off the bus.
They're going to get after you.
Yeah.
And that's going to create some potential problems. But and I think that the point guard position has been solid for Vandy this year, and I wouldn't have any complaints there. I would like this, Studi, I think, is a very, very talented player. And if he takes good high percentage shots, he's a really good player. If he, sometimes he has he rushes shots and he's not really on balance when he takes them. And I think that hurts them. And it kind of, anytime scorers take bad shots, everybody, that kind of poisons the water for everyone. And so having that kind of a problem, if you will, because Studi is a guy that, if I game plan for Vandy, I'd be really afraid of what he's capable of doing. So and Thomas can light it up. I mean, they've had some games where they've shot the ball from 3-point range unbelievably well. So I don't know. It's a guessing game. I think that Coach Stackhouse right now is really, spending some time with his staff, figuring out, who the right guys are. The hockey does the plus minus system, and that's not all bad for basketball, because sometimes that can identify someone who's a weak link in the chain.
Yeah.
Coach, you talked about Malik Dia. I mean, what he was able to do against Shibwe. Shibwe looked like he was caught off guard. He didn't expect Dia to go out there and hit some step back threes on him. I mean, he hit one in the corner that was unbelievable. I mean, he's falling out of bounds. So, with him, Coach, if you're Coach Stackhouse right now, we know how tough it is right now. They got A&M, and then you got Alabama. You get in a little bit, it gets a little bit easier with Ole Miss, but with Malik Dia specifically, what do you do with him? I mean, do you put him in more pick and pop situations? You got to play him more right now. I mean, there's no other option. But has he kind of found something with Dia without Robbins and Dort? I mean, do they go to that more now?
I don't know. It's the problem that Vandy has all the way down the line when it comes to personnel, and that is they've got some really good players that deserve from game to game more minutes. And yet, when your memory of what a guy has been able to do in certain situations, makes you lean in that direction a little bit. And they really have 10 or 11 guys that can really have good games or good periods in games. And it's a tough situation because you don't have a Shibwe and a Toppin that are going to get your points and rebounds. You got guys that can go for 8 and 3, or they got guys that might go 12 and 6 on the board. So tough situation. I remember Rick Bird telling me one year, he ended up, we used to talk a lot when he was coaching there about things that they did. And one year he called me and he says, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is different. He said, I always had, my starters and maybe 3 other guys that you knew who's going to be in, who's playing with whom. And it was pretty easy to figure those things out. He says, I've got 11 or 12 guys that are pretty close. And that's when he started using a lot of players, and they ran in and out a lot. And Casey Alexander does a lot of that now himself. And to see Casey, I look out there someone and I say, how is this team going to score points? And they figure out a way to get it done. And the same way with Rick, and the same way with any coach, once he gets his rotation down pat.
Coach, we were staying on subject of sort of these younger players like Malik Dia. We've seen throughout the season guys, obviously like Malik Dia, who had a really breakout game the other night. Colin Smith has been playing really good minutes. And whenever he's in the game, someone like Noah Shelby has shown some real flash. Now, obviously the issue is if they don't get enough minutes, they can't get used to the flow and the pace of the game, and they can look a little rusty. I think that's just part of being a freshman and learning how to play SEC basketball. But from what we saw on the other night, Jerry Stackhouse specifically, when asked about Jordan Wright's lack of minutes in the second half, and I thought this was a great comment, and I think it's something that we should see more of. He sort of called Jordan out and said, we can't have sloppy play like that from our seniors. If you're a coach and you look down the bench and you see guys sitting who have talent, who are younger guys but are unproven, how do you justify putting them in over someone like a Jordan Wright, who, he's not putting up the numbers right now, and his easy shots aren't falling at the rim, but who has been in the program for 3 or 4 seasons and has shown you that he can do it? How hard is it to pull that trigger and just let the young guys go?
Well, I think every coach has to it's all about trust. Some guys, it's very easy to use them and throw them in there whenever you want to. If you don't trust a guy and things are tight and you're back and forth, you can't have junior or senior shooting bad shots, low percentage shots, and you can't have guys hoping passes get through in a crowd. And that goes back to that trust factor. Who's going to give you solid minutes and not cost you possessions in the guts of the game? So every coach has to deal with that, and having trust for a guy who's a good system player goes a long way in their minutes they get.
Coach, looking at the schedule for Vanderbilt, they've got at A&M on Saturday, then at Alabama, and then they got Ole Miss at home and then Tennessee at home. So obviously when you've got a chance to beat a good team at home, you got to do that if you're Vanderbilt right now, but it feels like they're going to have to pull off an upset or two down the stretch of this season to have a shot potentially at a bubble NCAA tournament berth, to even get back onto the bubble, try to stack some quality wins. I mean, at 18-13, say that's best case. That's my best case. They finish 18-13, maybe win a game or two in the SEC tournament. You finish 11-7 in the SEC. Would you agree, Coach? I mean, what is there a win, the 20 win mark? Do they need to get there? 19 wins. I mean, with this team, what do you think a barometer is for them to potentially start being even considered for the bubble and then in the NCAA tournament?
Well, there's nothing optimistic about playing, three of the top 10 teams in the country coming up. And Ole Miss looks like a game that, you got to win, but those other three are going to be really, really tough wins.
Yeah.
So I think that, of course, these two games coming up with A&M and Alabama, they have got to figure out some way to something good to come out of those games and not lose confidence, not lose the camaraderie that the team needs to have again, home and away, and try to get into the tournament. And realistically, I would guess, I would not guess best case scenario. I would guess probable scenario is 14 or 15 wins maybe. So Coach Stackhouse is going to he's got a big job on his hand. These next 2 weeks are big, I guess, come to Jesus type situations.
Yeah.
They better get it done. So come out of these next 4 games. If they could get 2 wins out of the next 4 games, I think they have momentum. If they don't get just the Ole Miss game, it's going to be kind of tough. But you got games at every turn in the SEC where you better have your A game ready, or you're not going to come out of there with a win.
No, it's now or never, do or die time. And we've talked about it, Coach, over the last couple years, specifically in the last 3.5 seasons. Vandy is 16-43 in the SEC under Coach Stackhouse. They haven't really come close to the NCAA tournament. They lost by double digits this year to Southern Miss. They were upset by Grambling State, both games at Memorial Gym. How would you, as a former assistant at Vanderbilt and been watching Vanderbilt basketball over the years, from your experience watching basketball, but also this team this season, how would you assess the last 4 years of the Vanderbilt basketball program? And is there a light at the end of the tunnel? I think a lot of fans are asking that, Coach. Is there a future here? Is there potential with this recruiting class coming in, the guys that are here now? Is there light at the end of this tunnel? Or is the future sort of bleak? I mean, how do you look at this past 3 or 4 seasons?
If every coach in the SEC is going to tell you one thing, and that is Vandy plays hard. They're tough out. They play really, really tough and on the defensive end. They're a game you really have to, a team you have to really game plan for. And so everyone's going to looks at them that way. Now it's in Vandy's corner to be able to put some teams away, and they've had some periods in games where they had, they were 4 down with so much time to go, and next thing you know, they're 10 or 11 down, and taking those negative periods of games away would be huge. And sometimes you do that because somebody's got to make big baskets, and I just think that they're going to have to find themselves, and they're going to have to find out what the right combinations are. They've got to make big shots, and they're capable of doing that. They've got some really scary guys. I mean, I think Lawrence has had a really, really good season. I think he's been phenomenal. And I would say probably if everybody's healthy and everybody's there, Lawrence and Robbins have got to be really great at their position. And then those other guys, those Wrights and those Studies and Thomas, they've got to do what they do best and do it at the right time.
Coach, we'll wrap it up here, but we'll look ahead to the Texas A&M game. Like you said, they're a type of team that as soon as you get off the bus, they're going to guard you. Anytime we play any of these sort of teams, my dad, he always references those 90s Arkansas teams, the 40-minute in hell teams, just to where they would press you all game long and just play really good defense. And I feel like every time Vanderbilt plays any sort of team that's really aggressive on defense, not just this season, all my life, really, I feel like it's just ended up really, really poorly. And just for some strange reason, Vanderbilt, in my mind, has always had a really tough time defending going against really aggressive defensive teams. You look at Radford, he's a lockdown defender. He's improved his scoring ability a lot, so he's going to be a double threat on both ends of the court. Vandy travels to College Station for a really tough matchup at Reed Arena on Saturday. What sort of chances do you give Vanderbilt on Saturday, and what do they have to do to possibly come out with a win?
Well, one thing they've got to do is have some pressure releases in their offense. A&M's going to overplay passes. They're going to really make it tough to make entry passes to the post. They're going to switch some, but they're going to fight over screens a lot. And so Vandy's got to do some things to take that pressure off, some backdoor plays, isolations where a guy can have to get it done without any help defense and score against those tough defenders. So I think their only chance to win in College Station and against Alabama would be to make sure they don't have too many empty possessions along the way, and they've got to do something to relieve that pressure defense.
One more follow-up question, just in your coaching experience, a lot of these sort of teams who are really aggressive on defense, they can create a lot of turnovers, but like you said, if you call certain sort of plays or schemes, you can really get around them and get them reaching. You can get them in foul trouble, or you can find yourself easy buckets. And in your coaching experience, this is more of a personal question for you, did you prefer playing against those sort of really aggressive defenses? Because in your mind, you thought, okay, if we can scheme up something here, we can get around them. Or anytime you saw a sort of team that, like you said, would guard you right off the bus and was face guarding you the whole time, were they sort of like those nuisance teams?
Yeah, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, who's going to get a big basket for you that keeps a lot of momentum going, stops the momentum another team has, or creates momentum for yourself. And like I said, we had very smart players throughout the 70s. We were fortunate to have really guys that had high basketball IQs, and we had some really nice pressure release plays where if the guy overplayed, we'd have a rear screen or a backdoor cut, and getting the ball in the hands of those guys that can score. Look back at a Terry Compton or a Butch Fear, and they had their own way of doing things during my days there. And the 70s were probably maybe the best decade ever for Vandy basketball, and we were fortunate to have smart players, good shooters, and good leadership. I mean, how much better leader can you have than Jan Van Bredikoff? I mean, he played point guard on offense and guarded the five man on defense. That's a rare combination, and we had good success because of those kind of things. Who's gonna be able to keep Butch Fear from taking the ball in the paint with all his long arms and ability to get the shot off? You got to have somebody that can man up there and get it done individually or as a team. Relieve that pressure with the backdoor cuts or rear screen or something that takes that, what I'd call guys that try to chew your numbers off on defense. Got to neutralize them some way.
They didn't call him the F troop for no reason, huh, Coach?
Well, I tell you, every time I hear the word F troop, I remember Joe Ford. He had one of the best quotes I ever heard from a player against Kentucky as a freshman. In the two games against them, I think he was something like 13 or 14 inside the final 5 minutes from the free throw line. And as a senior, he missed the front end of a 1-and-1 and both ends of a 2-shot foul one night. And I said, Joe, how do you explain that? He said, it took me a while to learn how to choke. So
Man,
I didn't have anything to say after that.
That tells you about their confidence. That's awesome. Yeah. Coach, appreciate the time. I know you got to run. Vandy and A&M coming up on Saturday. It's always great to have you on, and hopefully Vandy can start to string together some wins here down the stretch.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it. And tell Tommy and the great Queen hello for me.
I will. I texted him last night and said I would be on a podcast with you, and my mom said that you were one of the nicest people she's ever met, and my dad said hello, and he loves chatting Vandy hoops with you.
All right,
Thanks,
guys.
Coach.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.